with that, looking inside this week opening edition of Big Ten Today, presented by Gatorade. Rick Pizzo alongside Howard Griffith. We began the weekend with two unbeatens inside the Big Ten. Those two remain flawless. Oregon, Indiana both winning, but Penn State was really good. Ohio State dominant. Howard, we could potentially have 4 of the top 5 teams in the country when the CFP rankings release comes out Tuesday night.
And things are shaping up really nicely for the Big Ten Conference. You think about, one of the things that I think about actually is where Indiana ultimately falls. Well, will they be in front of Tennessee, or will Tennessee remain in front of them? So that'll be interesting to keep an eye on. But it's clear that the committee, really has an idea of what they want to see out of Indiana. They still have a great game coming up in 2 weeks.
Yogi Roth is with us as well. Yogi, the two unbeatens on different sides of the coin. No one is surprised that Oregon is still unbeaten at this point in the season. Everyone is shocked that the Hoosiers, meanwhile, are 10-0.
Yeah, I mean, what a weekend for both teams. I mean, the offensive lineman thriving for the Ducks. You got a touchdown. You got a 2-point play. Janoris Wilson, Josh Connerly. That made all the big men celebrate. I know we're pumping up the Heisman. We should bring back the Piesman for those offensive linemen. Big fan of that award that was like a decade ago in college football. And then Indiana. I mean, you had Kurt Cignetti giving out flowers after the game, taking a day off. His daughter got engaged in the field, and they're undefeated. So a big-time weekend for the two undefeated teams. And I think big picture for this league, there's 10 teams that have an opportunity if they win 1 or 2 games to go bowling. Think about that where we sit here in November. That's pretty impressive with those teams in the middle of the league.
Yeah, huge weekend wins by the likes of Rutgers, UCLA. We'll get to those teams in just a bit. But the big story focuses on not just the top of the league, but the top of the country. It's the recently released AP poll, and there are 4 Big Ten teams among the top 5. Only Texas from outside the Big Ten inside that top 5. As Howard said, a week ago, the AP liked Indiana better than Tennessee. The committee liked Tennessee better than Indiana. We'll see if that holds true this weekend on Tuesday, or if the Hoosiers are potentially all the way inside that top 5. Oregon holds on to the number 1 spot, and arguably the number 1 reason the play of Dillon Gabriel set the all-time NCAA total touchdown record. Yogi mentioned the big guy touchdown. That was 179, breaking Case Keenum's record. He added another. He is at 180 total touchdowns, now also 2 starts away from tying predecessor Bo Nix's all-time NCAA starts record.
As a kid, you just love playing the game, and I've been a guy who's tried to play the game as long as I can, and maximize every moment. That's from youth football league to middle school football, intermediate football, high school, college, so on. But I think more than anything, that's not things you'll take with you. It's the relationships, the people, Janoris catching that touchdown. Things like that is things I'll remember, not necessarily, a record book. And I think that's true to a lot of people. And I think that just happens when you lock in and focus in where you're at, and like I said, I don't want to shy away from that or dodge the question, but I think getting to this point has always been pouring into people, being right where my feet are, and maximizing the moment, because that's all we have.
Such a wonderful answer from a completely grounded young man. These numbers are mind-blowing. 180 total touchdowns. Yes, I understand we're in a different era where guys are playing 6 years, but do the math. That's 30 touchdowns per year, and he hasn't even finished year number 6. And here is a guy who is clearly in the mix for the Heisman Trophy. These game leader numbers presented by Gatorade. Let's discuss now his Heisman chances. Yogi, for years, this has been a quarterback-driven award. I know Ashton Jeanty is having a monster year, the Boise State running back. But you have to think right now that if Gabriel continues to play at this level, and maybe more importantly, Oregon continues to stay at number 1, he's likely considered the front runner.
Look, I got a Heisman vote, and he's easily going to be on that ballot. I think right now, when I look at that award and look at where he stands, I always ask, what is the unique trait? Do they have what I like to call the it factors? How do you define the it factor? I think it's when you walk into a room, people feel your presence, and you make them better. I've been around Dillon Gabriel a bunch, whether it was in the offseason, throughout this season, he walks into any environment and he just elevates it with his standard, with his personality. And this is a guy who was challenged by Dan Lanning when he arrived to connect with his teammates, because he didn't have 2 years like his predecessor, as you referenced, in Bo Nix. He had about 8 months, and he just poured into him. Terrence Ferguson, who caught a touchdown from him, the first one of the season between those two, referenced it after the game. He talked about the dime time retreat when Dillon Gabriel made sure that a lot of the skill guys and he got together this summer just to spend time with one another, to pour into relationship aspect. You've seen that pour out. You hear his offensive linemen talk about protecting him. Look at all the players that elevate because of what he stands for, how he walks into that facility every day. And that's what you want the award to be a reflection of. Let's remember, the award is not just the best player. It's defined as the player who defines excellence with integrity. And I just look at Dillon Gabriel, and I think that he's done that. He's been masterful as a player with his legs, of course, with the amount of touchdowns he's accountable for. But ultimately, the way he's impacted that building and how they've taken the next step is, I think, the biggest thing that stands out to me.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely huge when you talk about his leadership and what he's been able to do. And you mentioned it, talking about pouring into your football team. And that's a big part of it, that you get an opportunity to see internally when you have a time to spend around the program. What's going to be interesting is he's going to have some marquee games that are going to be coming up with an opportunity, if likely at this particular point, they'll be in the Big Ten championship game. That'll be a huge stage for him to also go out and put up big numbers. There'll be some other guys. You talked about Gentry and the job that he has done and how consistent he has been all year. And I would throw out a guy, Travis Hunter, as well, just because you talk about some unique traits. I'm not saying that he's going to win it with a vote. I have one as well.
Yeah, but he plays both sides of the football, and he plays them extremely well.
What he does is phenomenal, and you wonder how many votes he will take off the West Coast with people wanting to give some credit to him. But I think when you think about it being traditionally a quarterback award, and you think about what's still ahead of Oregon and the #1 team in the country, it's hard to think that he would not be the front runner going into that weekend.
Also a Heisman voter, so that makes 3 of us on today's show. And a lot of folks actually cast their votes before the championship games are played.
Don't do it.
Little bit of an issue for me. Different conversation for a different moment. Guy gets to the championship game, you should probably consider how he plays in that championship game before you cast your vote. But that is neither here nor there. That we'll worry about in early December. As for the game, Yogi, you mentioned the big guy touchdown. I love the play calling, the creativity. This Oregon defense got back to basics in the second half and really shut down Maryland after the break. I'm just not so sure right now that there's a weak spot on this team that any opponent could look at and say, that's where we have to take advantage.
Yeah, you got to give Will Stein and Tosh Lupoy a ton of credit. To me, they both should be up for the Broyles Award as the top assistant coach in college football. You look offensively, the things that they continue to do that just keep you on your heels, whether it's formationally, whether it's with tempo, you add in the ability, the skill players down the field. It's just so impressive. Defensively, to me, was the story of the game. You watch how this defense flies around. I mean, how many times when you watch that broadcast where the announcers, our friends at the Big Ten Network, say, whoa, look at the hit, look at the speed, look at the physicality. Jordan Birch, of course, leading the way, looking like the premier recruit he was coming out of high school, coming off of an injury a couple weeks ago. He was just dominant. I mean, there were times where he was just manhandling members of that offensive front. So big-time performance, and it's really the standard of what this team has been. You know, you referenced no weaknesses. I think that's fair. I'll go back to it again. They're the most improved team in America. From week 1 until now, they just continue to evolve. They're going to get everybody's best. I thought Maryland had a really good game plan against them. This is a fun game early on. Maryland had some chances, but if you don't make every one of those work for you as the opponent, you just got no shot. And to me, that's what Oregon does. If you have a little window, you better take it because it's going to close extremely fast. It did in all phases, including special teams in this game.
You talked about how quickly Oregon has, in recent weeks, been able to get off to quick starts and really just be able to bury their teams. You know, that's been impressive. Maryland, as you mentioned, had some opportunities there but didn't take advantage of it. It almost appears to me when you're going against and playing against Oregon and trying to game plan, you have to be playing at your absolute best, and to really be able to pull this game out, Oregon has to do some things that aren't they're at their best. And really, you haven't seen them do that. And then I go back to this. This team is so physical on both sides of the line of scrimmage. This is what you want your team to be like if you're trying to win a championship. You look at the depth of the roster. You look at the wide receiver room. You just look all around. They have the athletes, the talent to be able to sustain a long drive, not only into Big Ten championship, but into the playoffs. And those are the types of teams that we're going to see that get that opportunity.
I know it sounds maybe crazy and definitely scary to the opposition. I think this team actually has another gear. I think they can get even better based on what we've seen to this point. And it's interesting, last couple of years, you see the CFP releases, there's been a lot of debate. Who should be number one? There is no discussion right now about who should be number one. There's discussion 2 through 5 and certainly beyond. Everyone is on board. Oregon is the clear number one in the country right now. Now, one of the more interesting conversations to have surrounds the Big Ten's other unbeaten. Indiana, by Curt Cignetti's own admission, did not play its cleanest game, did not play its best game against Michigan, but they're still Windiana. Now 10-0 for the first time in program history. Yes, they were outscored in the second half, but at the end of the day, they found a way. They're unbeaten. They have this week off to get ready for the Ohio State game in Columbus a week from this coming Saturday. I mean, Yogi, this is the story that just keeps giving. It's a fairy tale, except it's actually becoming reality in and outside of Bloomington, Indiana.
Yeah, and they had an opportunity to really roll Michigan, in my opinion. There were some uncharacteristic drops, some missed opportunities that we've seen Indiana take advantage of, even turnovers backed up in their own end zone. To me, the story of this one was two things. One is that this team's focus is dialed. They're not thinking they're playing the Michigan 1 through 145. They're just playing this year's team. And I think you saw that. I think the moment sometimes when you haven't been undefeated, when everything is a new experience for you, like it is for the entire roster, the entire community of this fan base. This is brand new for them. They act like it's old hat. And I go to the defense and Brian Haynes. They got after this Michigan offensive front. I thought they won at the line of scrimmage. They won creatively. They were getting a ton of penetration in the backfield. Aiden Fisher and company were flying to the football. They made plays down the field. I mean, outside of that first drive, that offense for Michigan, to me, really struggled moving the ball, especially through the air. And it was because of the diverse scheme that Brian Haynes has. We talked about it last week, right? I mean, what this defensive line is trying to do is wreak havoc, get penetration, and then the linebackers make up for any of their errors, any of those mistakes. To me, this defense was the story, and I hope when the committee looks at this team, they say, yeah, a great story, but also the way they play. They gave a team. There wasn't one player on Michigan's roster that chose Michigan over Indiana. They were going to Michigan all day long. I mean, it's a loaded roster. I know the Michigan's down this year, but they've got all the talent. And I thought Indiana won at the line of scrimmage defensively all game long, and it was really impressive.
Yeah, the job that they continue to do in the interior line is really remarkable when you look at this Indiana team. And how about the post-game interview with Coach? He got emotional.
Yeah.
He had to catch himself.
He's starting to understand, I think, now what this really means.
Yeah, and I don't know that he hasn't understood.
Or at least he's downplayed it.
Yes, he's downplayed it. And I don't care what I've been in situations where you're chasing championships and you're getting in a situation, you're racking up the wins and you haven't lost. It is an immense amount of pressure. But they seem to be handling it, taking care of business. And you're talking about guys that have not played necessarily or been considered the highest ranked players at their position. But they have developed, they've gotten better, they're playing in an unbelievable scheme. You talk about Broyles Award candidates, you got two there, plus a Coach of the Year candidate as well.
No, I don't even think he's a candidate, Howard. He's the favorite by a mile and a half right now.
It is remarkable what they've been able to do. And you talk about, sometimes you say, well, you don't know what you don't know. I don't get the sense here. They have a great understanding for what they're doing. This is going to be, I think, the best story in all of college athletics when you really think about it. And I also think this is going to be one of those stories that athletic directors, other coaches, and just people who are fans of the sport are going to want to spend time and understand, how did this happen? How were you able to catch lightning in a bottle? And they're all going to try to recreate it.
Well, maybe it does change the hiring process, because the thought process traditionally is, if you're a school like Indiana who has struggled in the Big Ten, you go out and you get a young up-and-comer from the MAC or a smaller conference. Scott Dolson deserves a lot of credit, the Indiana AD. He went outside the box to get a guy who has won at every place he's ever been, even though those places weren't the biggest of places he does just continue to win. Yogi, before we leave, I want to mention the fact, I don't think we can forget about this. Indiana has a bye this week before the Ohio State game. Remember the last time they had a bye between a game that we talked about big time was going to be really tough for them against Nebraska? And what happened? That's not going to happen in Columbus, but we can't downplay the fact that is an edge for this Indiana coaching staff.
This is incredible. I mean, when you look at the way the schedule, to your point, has set up for this team, and I think you're right, Howard, like in terms of this, the mindset of this team coming into this season, I think was hoping things would go well. You talk to the staff, and we had them after they beat UCLA in LA, and the message from Coach Cignetti in pregame was, when you come back in after this game, don't be surprised if we roll our opponent. They did just that, and when you talk to them about it, and the players, they were like, whoa. Okay, yeah, coach really thinks we're going to go do this. Then they did, and I think we've just seen this confidence grow. So now this will be their biggest test, right? You're going up against their premier blue blood, one of the true threats for the national championship game on the road in Columbus. We know all the fanfare around that game will be massive, and you get an extra week. I love how it sets up for this team. I also think that when you look at that game, this is going to be a fun matchup. I really do. I know it's 2 weeks away. We got a lot of time to break it down, but because it's so fun and exciting and the thrill of potential victory on the road is going to lock in a CFP berth if Indiana can get this. And I think for them, even if they split the last two, I think they're in. I think these arguments we're hearing around 2-loss SEC teams, et cetera, up the committee is saying, oh, let's again watch how this team plays. This isn't about the history of the program or the history of other programs around the country. It's about what they've done. And they have rolled teams. I know the score wasn't dominant in terms of the Michigan game. It was a really good game. And you're going to get that against the defending national champions. But again, I go to the line of scrimmage, things where you're saying, what can this team do against an Ohio State, against an Oregon? I think they can go compete. I think there's no reason to not say Indiana can go with all the tools that they have and the scheme that you referenced. They can go win against anybody in this league and are competitive, I think, against anybody around the country coming out of a league that, as you referenced, is as top-heavy as anybody in America right now.
It is amazing. I will throw this out there a little bit, getting ahead of myself a little bit. I know, Yogi, you're all over recruiting and what happens there. I have to imagine that the phones are ringing.
Totally different than it's ever been.
Players that want to get into this system, guys that want to get in the system and see, wait a minute, well, they took a guy from here. Well, if I go there, what can they do? What can they do with me? This is going to be fascinating to watch. And remember, the signing date is a little bit early in the midst of all of this.
This is not your father's Indiana. Forget about it. This is not your older brother's Indiana. This is a completely different situation moving forward for Curt Cignetti and the Hoosiers. Now, you got to keep Sig in Bloomington because you know there are going to be a lot of folks.
But it's just not him.
No,
it's
I understand.
the entire coaching staff. They've got to figure out how to keep them all together.
All right, much more football still to come. Do have some basketball news to share with you. Matt Painter told us on Sunday that freshman Daniel Jacobson, who was supposed to be replacing Zach Edey down low, will be lost for the season. Broke his tibia after playing just 1 minute in a game over the weekend. Again, Daniel Jacobson out for the year. Going to have to figure out how to fill that number 5 spot for the Boilermakers moving forward the rest of this year. And coming your way tonight here on the Big Ten Network, we have a basketball tripleheader. Begins in Columbus. Ohio State takes on Youngstown State. Then the aforementioned Boilers at home against Yale. UCLA tries to bounce back to that loss to New Mexico as the Bruins take on the Terriers of Boston University. Congrats to Rutgers women's star Destiny Adams. How about this for a stat line? 36 points, 22 rebounds on Sunday against NJIT. Got a bunch of those points at the free throw line. This game had a combined 63 fouls. It was the second straight double-double for Adams in which she scored at least 30 points. That's putting up numbers. Certainly excited to be out at Wrigley with Howard Griffith, Jerry DiNardo, Brock Vereen, Mike Hall, Tyvis Powell will be there as well. We have room for Yogi if he can get here from the West Coast. If you can't, Yogi, I know you're still going to be focused on Ohio State and their quest in the Natty or Bust campaign that we've described 2024 as. There's been some ups, some downs against Purdue. Ohio State did exactly what we expected them to do, and in my opinion, exactly what they needed to do, not just win, but be dominant against a struggling Boilermaker team.
Well, flight is booked, so I will be there.
Good man.
I'll be your photographer. I'll do your Instagram. I know you're big on social media, man. So with that said, I think a big part of what I looked at in this game is that first you see the score, and you're like, okay, they drilled them. Like what happened? And they score, were they up, 28-0 in the first quarter? It wasn't that. It was really workmanlike, and I thought it was in all phases. The execution was at a premium. Ryan Day talked about it after the game. Everybody knows what happens after a big win, coming home against a team that has struggled, and this team showcased the veteran element that we all knew they had coming into the season. I thought the way they did it with the defensive line, making so many plays, Jack Sawyer and company. I thought on special teams, blocking a punt was really impressive. And then offensively, I just go back to Chip Kelly and the scheme that this team has, whether it's G. Scott at tight end or the litany of wide receivers, having both backs in at the same time. I remember sitting there being like, if I'm a D coordinator watching this film in advance of whether it's this weekend's game, next weekend's game, and so on and so forth, how do you stop all the weapons that they have? And then you look at the quarterback, and Will Howard, to me, just continues to grow within the system. I love what he said afterwards. He's going to get new cleats, so he doesn't have to slip anymore. So it's a great thing for all Buckeye fans. But overall, it was a complete game. I didn't think they jumped on him and it was over in a minute. This was one where you just watched and it was just like, score. 3 and out, score. And they had to withstand a little bit. I'll give Purdue a little credit. I mean, they gave a good fight. You watched that first quarter, that first half, they had some opportunities, didn't take advantage of it. And again, just like the Oregon Ducks, if you don't take advantage of that small little window you have, it's over, and that was the story on Saturday.
You look at this roster at Ohio State, and you talked about some of the players that they have on the offensive side and just how difficult they are to prep for and prepare for and try what you decide you want to take away. And then all of a sudden you start to look at the defense. And if you had one issue with the team right now, the defense hadn't played at the level that you know that they can play at. And I think we've been waiting for that all year, particularly when the defensive line can go and take over the game. The run game is going to continue to get better, and I think that's a big part of having Howard run the football, be more involved in that. But that's going to open up the passing game as well. And they're just so talented. And yes, we talked about the pressure, and they talked about the pressure that they were under in the previous week. But they seem to just continue to go out and do exactly what they need to do to really hold serve and to really continue to move forward each and every week. I know everyone wants to see them blow teams out on a regular basis. We haven't necessarily seen that the entire year, but they have controlled games, and I think that's a big part of it.
Everybody does want to see Jeremiah Smith scores again. He could play in the NFL right now.
Rick, when I said that this spring, after seeing him after one practice, I said he's wasting his time right now. He should be in the NFL. He'd be the number 3 on anybody's roster right now in the NFL.
Insane state. Great news for Ryan Day, though. that can't happen this year. Can't happen next year. He's going to be around Columbus for at least a little while. Really impressive performance by Penn State on Saturday night. You lose to Ohio State the previous week. Washington coming to town. Yogi, this is a dangerous Washington team. You know this program very well. When the Huskies play well, they can beat just about anybody. We've seen that already this year. But they weren't ready for this environment. They did not play their best game of the year. And credit Penn State for that, because the Nittany Lions, especially defensively, took away pretty much everything Washington wanted to do.
Yeah, really after the first drive of the game where, UW gets a little help on a penalty, they move all the way down, they can't score a touchdown though, and you're thinking, okay, like this is how Jetfish wants to call the game. Ultimately, at the end of the day though, as the game went on, Abdul Carter, this defense, they were just too much, in my opinion, for the offensive line of Washington. And then on the flip side, the offensive line of Penn State showed out in a massive way. I mean, they were blowing people off the ball, really on both sides. It was the most complete performance I've seen from Penn State all season long against a team that isn't necessarily on paper up to their caliber. Oftentimes we've seen them play, I hate the quote, but it's kind of true, like to the level of competition, and they do get everybody's best. But to this past weekend, it was domination, right? After that early drive for Washington, it was so impressive. They looked like a CFP caliber team. The environment was just off the hook. Like I wanted to teleport there just to feel it for a second because it looked so incredible and infectious in that stadium, of course, with the whiteout, as you guys know better than I. But overall, they proved to be a dominant team. UW just not enough in the tank, not enough talent to go up against Penn State in this environment.
Yeah, I thought this game for Penn State was really an important benchmark to see what they look like coming out. We know how excited they get with the whiteout and how impressive that is and how tough an environment that is to play in. But coming off the tough loss, how are they going to be able to respond And they did exactly what they needed to do. You talk about what the offensive line was able to do, the defensive line. They were playing at a level that they needed to play at, I think, to give themselves the confidence to understand, we lost last week, but we're still a good football team. And I know people are going to question, what's their best win and ask that question, but they just need to go out and continue to handle their business and not stub their toe. And Warren, man, I got to tell you, he's my favorite college football player.
I knew that.
This dude is unbelievable. Just give him the football, and he just makes things happen. I wonder if he can catch punts. He should go back and catch some punts.
If there's something that you could do on the football field, trust me, Tyler Warren can do it. And I'm with you. I understand the argument about where's your really good win.
Yeah.
You don't have anything to do with USC's future after you beat them. You don't have anything to do with Illinois' future after you beat them. You played Ohio State in a situation where you easily could have won that game. I understand you didn't, but at the end of the day, if Penn State takes care of business the rest of the way and they're favored in their remaining games, they're not only going to be in the playoff, in my estimation, they're going to be hosting a first-round game.
Yeah, and that would be impressive, and that would be a step, because so much we talk about pressure of Ohio State and some other programs, Oregon, where they needed to go. All we heard all year, and all we've talked about all year, is if there were a 12-team playoff 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, Penn State would be there. Now they have the opportunity to be there, and if they get an opportunity to host a game, they have a chance to really solidify what they're doing and that they are a dominant program in college football.
Our congratulations to Michigan Field Hockey. The Wolverines winning the 2024 Big Ten Field Hockey Tournament over the weekend. Michigan knocks off number 1 nationally ranked Northwestern. The Wildcats had been previously undefeated before that loss. This after the Wolverines scored with just 4 seconds left in the semifinal to force a shootout, which they would win to earn a bid into that championship game. And with that championship, the Wolverines also qualify for the NCAA tournament as the Big Ten's auto qualifier. They will open up against Virginia. Maryland gets into the tournament as well. The Terps will take on Duke. Northwestern is the number 2 overall seed. That means they get an opening round bye. But if you're paying attention and looking down the line, the Wildcats and the Wolverines are on the same side of the bracket. And it is time for our big interview. As you may have guessed, the focus is Michigan Field Hockey. Marcia Pankratz, head coach of the Wolverines, is with us. Coach, I know you're just a day removed from the championship, but since you hoisted the trophy, you also found out your NCAA fate. You're now getting ready for Virginia. Were you and the team actually able to embrace and enjoy the moment?
Yeah, I think so. It was an epic weekend for, Big Ten field hockey in general, and we're just so proud of my team. I think they played their hearts out, and it was a great win. And we enjoyed after the game a little bit before the flight and the travel home. It was an exhausting weekend. 3 games in 4 days is not an easy thing. So they're going to rest today, and then we'll get after getting ready for UVA.
I mentioned the Northwestern had been unbeaten until you took them down in that championship game, but you also took them to overtime during the regular season in what was their most tightly contested regular season game. So with all that experience and the knowledge that you have of their program and that they have of yours, what was your approach heading into that championship match?
Well, I'll tell you, Northwestern's a phenomenal team. They've got so much talent at every line and every position. They have so much speed and experience. Their goalkeeping's tremendous. So, they are all that you can handle. And so I thought our team stuck to the game plan really well. We tried to shut down Maddie Zimmer as much as we could because she's just phenomenal on every level. And, it just worked out in our favor this past weekend.
How were you able to get the lead and then maybe more importantly, keep Northwestern's explosive offense off the board entirely?
Yeah, team defense, I guess, and maybe a little bit of luck. But Claire Taylor was amazing. Peely was great back there. I think we double-teamed and triple-teamed the best that we could. And trying to, get a goal against those guys, I thought Alana put that in. It was a really special goal. And, once we got that, we just were trying to preserve the win. So it was really fortunate that, our defense was just super solid yesterday.
How do you describe the emotions of a head coach as you're watching the final seconds tick down in that type of setting? I imagine they're going about as slow as you could ever envision them going.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's totally nerve-wracking. It cannot go fast any slower. It just seems crazy. But yeah, super happy, a little bit surprised, but we'll take it. The last couple seconds I was joking with Claire Taylor. It's like just take care of the ball in the final seconds. Instead, she decides to do this really difficult skill by like throwing an overhead to the right where Seza is. And I thought, oh my word, I think our whole bench gasped in the last 10 seconds, but it worked out in our favor. So he's glad about that.
We were literally a moment away from seeing a different matchup in the final. You're down to Maryland in the semis with 4 seconds left, and you score to force overtime. We go to 2 overtimes. We go to a stroke off. You eventually knock off the Terps. Where does that rank, not among maybe your biggest wins as a head coach, but in terms of the most drama you've ever experienced as a head coach?
Yeah, I'm sure it's right up there for sure. On Maryland's field, playing against a very, very talented, dangerous team in Maryland. They've got a crazy great team. Our kids were just resilient. I think they felt they were in it the entire time. Even when there was a goal called back, there was no quitting them at all. And for them to be able to finish with 4 seconds, and then go into overtime, double overtime. Erin Riley, 5-on-5, 100 meters for 20 straight minutes. She didn't come out of the game once. It was extraordinary. They were just warriors the entire day. And then Hala was great in the shootout. They had taken copious notes the day before when Iowa went with Maryland into the shootout. So Hala was super prepared, and she performed beautifully under pressure. So couldn't have been more proud of all of them.
I know you've been in that position as a player during your career and as a coach, to watch your players try to score in the shootout, to watch your goaltender try to deny in the shootout. So take us on the field. What's it like if you're a player and everyone is watching you and you know that there's only one good and one bad outcome based on what you and the goalkeeper do?
Yeah, I think and it's like super silent. It's like a pin could drop in the stadium. So it's could be nerve-wracking, but you just have to have practice and feel confident in your preparation. I think if you feel confident in your preparation, then you go up there and just stay focused on what you do great and just execute it. And don't worry about the outcome and just get it done. So that's we try to harp with the players on both ends, and it worked out well for us on Friday.
As I mentioned, coming up next, you get that matchup against Virginia, your first outing in the NCAA tournament. What concerns you about the Cavs? With the full knowledge, I know that you have a lot more scouting to do before that match later this week.
Well, they're very talented. They've got a lot of skilled players in a lot of positions. They're very experienced. They play in a conference in the ACC that game in and game out is a battle, and they're playing high level of competition all year long. So they're going to be seasoned and ready to go. So it's going to be a great matchup, and we're looking forward to it.
Marcia, what was it like in the Big Ten this year, not just in the tournament, but throughout the regular season as well? Mentioned 3 teams that get NCAA tournament bids. Iowa also had a very good year at the start before slowing down a little bit. Describe for us what it's like to be able to get through this league and get to this point in the season.
Yeah, I think it's a tremendous accomplishment. I think the Big Ten is just from top to bottom a great conference. I mean, any of those teams, Rutgers, Iowa, Ohio State, every single one of them could Rutgers play in the NCAA tournament. We're all about even. I think sometimes it just is a play here and there that separates all of us. I'm a little bit disappointed. Only 3 teams got in from the Big Ten because I think all of those teams could compete. And we're just fortunate to be here and really looking forward to it.
Now, Marcia, I know you're worried about Virginia right now and Virginia alone, but we do like to look at the bracket, and should you win that game, it likely sets up a third meeting with Northwestern over the course of the weekend. Fair to say that's a date that you and your team would welcome very much?
Well, it's not easy to play a team 3 times in a season. We knew we were going back to Northwestern if we weren't a top 4 seed, but we're not worried about that quite yet. Virginia is all we can manage, and we're going to really focus on just the first quarter of that game and move from there. But like I said, it's a great matchup all the way around. It should be some really good, fun hockey to watch.
Marcia Pankratz, head coach of Michigan field hockey, champion to the 2024 Big Ten tournament, now moving ahead to the NCAA tourney where they will face Virginia later this week. Marcia, congrats again. Really appreciate the time. Best of luck to you and the team in the NCAAs.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Hey, let's give some love to Sean Foster, shall we?
All day long.
UCLA was left for dead about a month ago after a really tough schedule, some close losses, but not quite good enough. Here come the Bruins. 3 straight after that 1-5 start after they knock off Iowa 2017. One of the few teams this year figure out a way to slow down Caleb Johnson and that Iowa running attack. Yogi, I know that UCLA was riding a little bit of momentum heading into this game, but there's not many folks out there that saw this one coming. And I will say it again. I think Deshaun Foster and the staff deserve a ton of credit, not just for the game plan in this one, but for the way that they have kept this team together after the early struggles.
We called 3 straight UCLA games. One was the loss to Minnesota, then it was 2 straight wins. I went over last week to the facility during the week in advance of a short week in the Iowa game that you referenced. And I'm like, what's the vibe? You know, you're going up against one of the best running games in the country, a historic program, and a coach who's been there for obviously an extremely long period of time. And this team's confidence is so grounded. I think sometimes in LA, it could be a lot of like flash, hype, stuff that isn't really grounded just because that's what LA sometimes breeds, fellas. Not over at UCLA and Westwood right now. And to me, it starts with this defense. And not only do you give Deshaun Foster the credit, but how about defensive coordinator Akaika Malloy? I mean, this is a defense that had struggled. You referenced the slate of games that in terms they had to go to LSU, they had to go to Penn State, they had to play Oregon. They've just stayed steady. And as Jay Toia referenced after the game, #stop the run, they did just that. Oluwafemi Oladejo, 4 TFLs. I mean, they put the clamps on an Iowa run game and Iowa offense that I didn't know if they could do. And every time out, since that Minnesota game, they've had a different game plan for every one of their opponents. It has been so impressive. And then you talk about the offense. It's a pro-style system. And Howard, you know about pro-style systems much more than I do, man. But it doesn't happen overnight when it's very intricate. It's taken some time for them to find consistency. So if UCLA can stop hurting themselves, eliminate these penalties, 9, 10, 11 penalty games, they got a shot to win out, fellas, on a Friday night here against UW, SC in the rivalry game, and against Fresno State. And we are talking a totally different tune than we were at the end of September.
Yeah, this has been an amazing journey for them this year, right? Because as you mentioned earlier, most people did leave them for dead. And you don't really take into account the schedule. You just go, okay, they lost these games. This team is not where they need to be. But he's been able to keep the locker room, not only Coach Foster, but that entire coaching staff. One of the things, if you want to have success against a zone blocking scheme, you must create penetration. And they were able to do that defensively. And they come up with the huge plays on the offensive side. Got the run game going as well, which I thought was huge for them. And then to be able to make the plays in the passing game that they needed at times was huge for them. And it's just about continuing to stay the course. This is a good football team. I think we all knew and recognized they were a good football team earlier in the year, even though they were coming up with some losses. They just have to stay the course and continue to recruit.
Well, I got to tell you, that USC-UCLA game late in the year is setting up to be for some different stakes than we thought it would be for at the beginning of the year, and not just for the Bruins, but certainly for the Trojans as well. Let's touch on the Rutgers-Minnesota game that took place in Week 11 as well, because Rutgers had lost 4 in a row. Minnesota was riding a hot streak. Gophers on the exact opposite side of that. Looked like P.J. Fleck had everything going in the right direction, and then it just stops against a banged-up Rutgers team. I mean, Yogi, you talk about these Scarlet Knights deserving a little bit of love. They are down to second and third string in a lot of positions, and they find a way to win a football game they had to have if they want to get back to a bowl.
Yeah, I mean, this was literally the definition of chop. Right, the mantra that Greg Schiano often references when talking about his program. And look, they were kind of mirror images of one another. Everybody knows the story of P.J. Fleck having worked for Coach Schiano in the past at other places. I think I net out in this game. As I watched it, I'm thinking, okay, Minnesota is going to win this one. It's 16-14. They just got to have control of the ball. But to your point about Rutgers, they just continue to compete. DJ Jabome, 13 tackles. He was all over the field physically. In the second half of this ballgame, I thought the defense of Rutgers really stood out. And in the first half, it was Ethan Kaliak-Manis. And how about him? I give him his props and his flowers, too. Beating a team that said, hey, we're going to go in a different direction at quarterback. He says, no problem, comes out and plays. You could argue his best half of football, throwing the football in I think, in the entire season, watching this one play out.
And you think about this. Kyle Monangai did not play.
Samuel Brown did not play. They're down to their third and fourth string running backs.
And we talked Saturday. This is a team that we knew that front line, the top 22, top 40 players on that roster could really go out and compete, but they needed to continue to build depth. And I think what we're seeing now is we're seeing some of that depth that's been forced into playing. And that they're still playing hard. That's one of the things we've always talked about as this program was continuing to build. They always played hard, but it just seemed like things weren't falling in place for them. But to overcome the injuries and to still be able to come up with a win, that says a lot about where the program is right now.
And seasons aren't always just defined by wins and losses because it doesn't take into account injuries, which has been a huge part of the story for Rutgers. They get back to the bowl game, get those extra 15 practices, get to sell that to recruits. I know it may not be the year that many envisioned, but I think there's also an argument that it would be a successful year at the end of it.
Never really let Baylor take that
The pure joy of an upset. Oregon knocking off number 12 Baylor 76-74. First win against a AP-ranked team since February of 2023. And maybe the best news of all, Sabrina Ionescu was in the crowd to see the Ducks get it done. Congrats to Kelly Graves, Deja Kelly, who had 20 in the Oregon women's basketball team. How about this highlight goal from Brody Zemer? I need to see that again, please. Minnesota sweeps away Wisconsin in Madison, and Zemer's letting the Badger faithful know all about it. He got the pass and in midair knocks it out and past the Badger goaltender. It is Minnesota with not one, but 2 3-2 wins. Wow. That's what you call hand-eye coordination to sweep away their arch rivals. Some soccer news for you. It is all UCLA in the women's soccer tournament, claiming the Big Ten championship in the first year that the Bruins were eligible to take home that tournament title, and it wasn't even close over the number 5 seed Rutgers. Scarlet Knights did a great job to get to the champ game, but UCLA wins it in a whitewash, 5-0. Bit closer in the semifinals on the men's stage. In fact, Michigan and UCLA in the first semi go to the shootout, and the Wolverines are able to hold on, knock off the Bruins to advance to the championship game. They will take on Ohio State, the Buckeyes, at or near the top of the rankings all year long in the national polls. Take care of business against Washington 3-1. Ohio State, Michigan in this weekend's Big Ten men's soccer tournament championship game. Now that we've taken you around the Big Ten, we take you to the moment that everybody waits for each Monday, the awarding of the helmet stickers. And Yogi Roth is first on the list.
Well, second week in a row, I'm just going to say the same thing. Dillon, Gabriel just continues to fill the shoes of Bo Nix. And now, my man, you are in company all by yourself. Congratulations. The new leader in NCAA total touchdowns, Dillon Gabriel. He gets sticker number 1. Number 2, let's go inside in the trenches. Jay Toia of UCLA. Look, he doesn't have all the numbers, but you watch him on every given snap at the defensive tackle position. He's taking on double teams every single rep, and they shut down the run game. Only 80 yards rushed allowed by Iowa. Big time props to him. And then I'll tell you what, fellas, every day with you, it feels like I'm undefeated. 10-0 every single time. Same thing for Kurt Signetti's daughter, Natalie. How about that? Getting proposed to post-game on the big screen. All the things we predicted in the preseason are coming true at Indiana. Congratulations to Natalie and Trent Van Horn. I hope every day is like it's undefeated. Congratulations to you two.
Amazing stuff there, Yogi, and it really is phenomenal because we have described accurately, in my opinion, this year as a storybook or a fairy tale type season for Indiana. I mean, you can't have a storybook or a fairy tale ending without somebody proposing to somebody else happily ever after, right?
This is outstanding.
Helmet stickers for Howard Griffith.
Well, you know, I'm going to stay in Bloomington, right? And let's go with Keyshawn Williams, right? And I think people really, you think back to that fourth quarter and you talk about that 22-yard punt return. I thought really gave Indiana all the momentum they needed to secure that game. So a helmet sticker for that young man. A guy I've been waiting for all year, Jack Sawyer. He is an unbelievable player. Hasn't been able to put up, I think, the sack numbers, but has been a big part of this team. Fumble return for a touchdown. And my guy, Tyler Warren.
Could give him a helmet sticker each and every week.
Just for being Tyler Warren. I love
jersey sticker, pants sticker,
I need to see him
sticker.
On punt return. I need to see that.
I'll make a call to James Franklin and see what we can get done. For Yogi Roth and Howard Griffith, I'm Rick Pizzo. Thanks for hanging out with us on this edition of Big Ten Today.